Maya Thorne found the baby in a sealed stone chamber no one used anymore, tucked behind a tapestry meant to hide rot in the palace walls. No cradle, no attendants, only a bundle of royal linen, placed directly on the cold floor. The child made no sound. That was what stopped her breath. Not crying, silence. The kind that meant she might already be too late. Maya knelt and pressed her fingers to the infant's chest. There was a heartbeat, faint and irregular, like it was deciding whether to continue. His skin was icy, his limbs slack, his mouth tinged blue. He hadn't fed in days. She knew the signs without needing to think. She had watched them once before, counting the hours as her own child faded despite everything she gave. This baby was starving. And starvation always ended the same way. Her throat tightened. The laws echoed louder in her mind than the palace bells ever had. Humans were forbidden from touching royal vampire blood. Feeding one was treason. Sheltering one was a death sentence. Her body ached anyway. Milk still came, every night. As if her body refused to accept the grave she had filled 2 months ago. Arms that should have been empty burned with purpose they were no longer allowed to have. The infant shifted weakly, a sound barely formed. Maya gathered him against her chest. Footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the door. And with that single act, she chose death. If it meant the child lived. The chamber was never meant to be opened again. The door groaned softly as Maya eased it shut behind her, sealing out the corridor and whatever might pass through it. The air inside was colder than the rest of the palace, heavy with the smell of stone and age. Dust lay undisturbed along the floor, softened only where time had carved faint paths through it, as if footsteps had once passed here long ago and then simply stopped. No hearth, no candles burning, only a single iron sconce on the wall, long empty to wax, and a narrow window set too high for anyone to look through. Dawn had not yet reached it. The chamber lived in perpetual half-shadow, the kind that swallowed sound and made even breathing feel loud. Maya shifted the bundle in her arms, instinctively angling her body to shield the baby from the chill. The royal cloth wrapped around him was clean but thin, ceremonial rather than practical. Too fine to belong here, too deliberate. Someone had chosen this place because no one came to it. Someone had chosen silence. Her gaze swept the room, sharp and searching despite the panic tightening her chest. There were no feeding bottles, no blankets, no bell cord pulled in haste. Nothing broken, nothing spilled, no sign of struggle or abandonment born of fear, only placement. The baby had been laid where the cold crept strongest from the stone floor, where the walls met at an angle that trapped the night air. A place designed not to draw attention. A place meant to finish what hunger had started. Maya swallowed hard. This wasn't negligence. This was judgment. A faint sound brushed her ear, barely there. She froze, heart slamming, certain for one awful second that footsteps had followed her. But the corridor beyond the door remained silent. The sound came again, weaker this time, from the child himself. His breathing stuttered, shallow and uneven. His small body trembled against her, not with strength, but with effort. Holding on took everything he had left. "I know," she murmured without realizing she'd spoken. The words slipped out of her the way prayers used to, back when she believed someone was listening. "I know." She lowered herself onto the edge of a narrow stone bench built into the wall, its surface icy even through her skirts. The baby shifted, his head rolling slightly against her arm, and a thin whimper escaped his lips before dissolving into nothing. His color seemed worse in the low light. His skin almost translucent, veins faintly visible beneath the surface. Too long, her mind whispered. He's gone too long without warmth. Maya pressed her forehead briefly to his soft hair, drawing in a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Fear crept up her spine, sharp and insistent. Every second she stayed here increased the chance of discovery. Servants rose early. Guards changed posts. The palace woke whether she was ready or not. She listened, counted her breaths, then for a moment, terror threatened to root her in place. If he died here in her arms, no one would ever know she'd found him. The thought was monstrous. Relief and horror twisted together until she felt sick. No, her body made a decision before her mind finished arguing. She adjusted her grip, drawing the child closer, cradling him the way muscle memory demanded. As she settled him against her chest, his head lolled weakly, mouth brushing fabric, searching without knowing what it sought. The first attempt did nothing. His lips parted, then fell still. Panic flared. Maya's hand shook as she guided him gently, whispering encouragement she didn't remember learning. "Come on. You can." Just a little. For a breathless span of time, nothing changed. Then barely he latched. The sensation hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught, tears blurring her vision as warmth spread where there had been only ache and grief for weeks. The baby suckling was weak and uncoordinated, more reflex than intention, but it was enough. His body responded almost immediately, the tension in his tiny limbs easing as if he were sinking into her. A sound escaped him, soft and fragile. Not a cry, something closer to relief. Maya closed her eyes. She counted again, steady now. His breathing slowed, deepened. Color returned in faint traces to his lips. The trembling eased, replaced by the smallest flutter of movement. Fingers curling against her bodice, clinging. Her heart broke open. She brushed her thumb along his cheek, reverent, terrified. "You're safe," she whispered, though the lie tasted sharp. "For now." Time stretched and folded in on itself. The chamber seemed to recede until there was only the child, the quiet rhythm between them, the shared warmth pushing back against the cold stone walls. For the first time since she'd lifted him from the floor, she allowed herself to believe he might live. That belief frightened her more than anything else, because now she knew the truth. He had not been lost. He had been left. Maya did not leave the chamber when the baby finished feeding. She couldn't, not yet. Moving him too soon felt dangerous, like tempting fate to reconsider its mercy. Instead, she stayed still, every sense sharpened, listening to the palace breathe around her. Somewhere beyond the thick stone walls, doors opened. Footsteps passed. A voice murmured, then faded. The world resumed, indifferent to the life she now held against her chest. The child slept heavier now, his tiny body warm where it had been deathly cold before. His mouth had slackened, lips parted slightly, a faint sound rising and falling with each breath. It was the sound of someone who intended to keep living. That was the problem. Maya adjusted her shawl to cover him more completely, heart hammering as she imagined how this would look to anyone else. A human servant, a royal vampire infant, her body providing what law had forbidden with the promise of death. The rules were carved into her long before this moment. Everyone in the palace knew them. Humans cleaned, cooked, carried, and disappeared when necessary. They did not touch royal blood. They did not shelter it. They did not feed it. Half-bloods, whispered about only in corridors and wine-soaked confessions, were considered mistakes, political threats wrapped in flesh. Mercy, when it came to such things, was not mercy at all. A sharp sound cut through her thoughts, the scrape of boots on stone. Maya froze. The sound came again, closer this time. Guards. She recognized the cadence instantly, the measured pace of those trained to hear fear. Her arms tightened around the baby, without her meaning to. He stirred, brow creasing, a soft noise forming in his throat. "No!" She breathed, barely more than air. She rose silently, joints aching from the cold, and moved toward the far wall where the shadows deepened. There was a narrow alcove there, barely large enough for a person to stand in, once used to hold banners or relics no one remembered anymore. She slipped into it just as torchlight flickered under the door. Keys rattled. Her pulse roared in her ears. She angled her body, turning so the baby's face was pressed against her skin, muffling any sound. His breathing hitched once, then settled. She held her breath with him, counting heartbeats like a prayer. The door did not open. After a moment, too long, far too long, the footsteps moved on. Maya sagged against the stone, shaking. Relief came sharp and vicious, followed immediately by terror. This would happen again. And again. Every feeding, every moment she stayed, increased the chance of discovery. The palace was not a place where secrets survived by accident. She looked down at the baby. His lashes fluttered. One eye opened briefly, unfocused, The red dull but unmistakable even in the low light. Not the vivid crimson of strength, but no longer the faded, lifeless shade she'd seen before. He made a small sound and shifted, seeking warmth, seeking her. Something in her chest broke loose completely. This was no longer a moment. It was a pattern forming. A need that would return in hours, not days. Hunger that would cry out whether she was ready or not. She would have to hide him. The realization settled over her with terrible clarity. Not just now, not just until dawn. She would have to build her life around this crime, reshape every step, every habit, every breath she took within these walls. There would be no undoing it. Maya moved when the corridor finally fell quiet, slipping out of the chamber and into the servants' passages she knew better than her own reflection. She kept to the narrow routes, the ones never meant for nobility, where the ceilings dipped low and the walls bore scars from decades of neglect. The baby remained silent, pressed against her, his trust absolute and undeserved. At one point, voices rose just ahead, 2 guards arguing softly about their rounds. Maya ducked into a linen closet, heart in her throat, and waited as shadows passed beneath the crack in the door. The baby stirred again, restless this time, hunger already beginning to wake. She pressed her lips to his hair, steadying herself. "I know," she whispered, tears burning. "I know." When they finally reached one of the unused rooms near the old servant quarters, Maya bolted the door and sank to the floor. Her legs gave out beneath her, strength draining now that the danger had passed. She fed him again, more easily this time, his grip stronger, his body responding with alarming speed. Life returned to him in small, undeniable ways. Color, warmth, weight, each improvement tightened the knot of fear in her chest. By the time the light outside the narrow window shifted, signaling the palace was fully awake, Maya understood the truth. She could no longer escape. This was not a kindness she could pay and walk away from. This was not a single merciful act that would fade into memory. She had crossed a line drawn in blood and law. And on the other side of it, holding a child who now depended on her for every breath. Maya knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would rather die than give him back. Maya learned the palace in a new way after that. Not as a place of corridors meant to be seen, but as a body full of veins and bones hidden beneath its skin. She moved through servant passages that curved behind walls, slipped through doors disguised as panels, and ducked into stairwells abandoned after renovations no one remembered. Some rooms had been sealed for decades, their purposes forgotten, left to collect dust and silence. Others were used so rarely that her presence felt like an intrusion even to herself. These were the places she chose. She kept moving the baby, never staying long enough for patterns to form. A few hours in a storage room lined with cracked barrels. A feeding in an old bathing chamber, where the pipes no longer carried water. Another hiding place behind a false wall near the eastern wing, where the stones still held warm from the day. Each time, she listened before she breathed. The palace had changed. She felt in the air, in the way voices carried farther than usual, in the tension that hummed beneath even casual conversations. Guards were everywhere now. Their boots echoed more often. Their torches burned longer. Questions were asked in tones that expected answers. Something was being searched for. Maya kept her head down, her movements careful, her face blank in a way servants learned to master early. The baby stayed hidden beneath her cloak, wrapped close, his presence a weight she felt even when he slept. Feeding him became a rhythm she learned to anticipate, hunger rising in like a tide she could sense before it broke. He grew stronger with each passing day. The change was subtle at first. His cries, once barely formed, sharpened into quiet protests. His hands, which had curled weakly against her chest, began to grip her clothing with surprising determination. His eyes opened more often now, tracking movement, focusing on her face as if memorizing it. The red in them deepened. Maya should have been afraid of that. Instead, she found herself watching for it, measuring his health by the way color returned to his cheeks, by the warmth that lingered even when she set him down for a moment. Each improvement brought relief and dread in equal measure. The healthier he became, the harder he would be to hide, the harder it would be to pretend this was temporary. One afternoon, while tucked away in a disused archive room filled with rotting ledgers. Maya froze as voices echoed just outside the door. "They swear the child was real," a guard muttered. "Not human. Not fully." "Then someone helped it," another replied. "Search the servants' wings again. No one leaves until we find out who." Maya's arms tightened instinctively. The baby stirred, sensing her fear, his brow furrowing as he made a small sound of discomfort. She pressed her mouth to his hair, breathing slowly until his body relaxed against hers. When the voices faded, she remained still for a long time, pulse racing, understanding settling deeper with every passing second. They were hunting him. That night, in a narrow room with no windows and walls scarred by age, the baby woke hungry and would not settle until she fed him. He latched quickly now, greedily, his small body pressing closer, as if he knew exactly where safety lived. Between swallows, he made soft, contented sound that filled the room in a way silence never could. Maya laughed then. It surprised her, a quiet, broken sound she hadn't made since before the fever, before the grave in the eastern gardens. Tears followed immediately, slipping down her cheeks as she watched the baby's fingers curl around her own, impossibly small and yet so strong. "I can't keep calling you baby," she whispered, voice trembling. "You deserve more than that." The thought had come to her before, always pushed away by fear. Names had power. Names made things real. But as she looked at him, at the life she was sustaining with every breath she took, the truth became impossible to deny. He was already real. She brushed her thumb along his cheek, watching his eyes flutter open, unfocused but intent. "Just between us," she murmured. "No one else." The name rose to her lips without planning, shaped by something older than thought. "Nikolai." The baby stilled, then made a soft sound, almost curious, as if he were listening. His fingers tightened once, and something in Maya's chest shifted, settling into place. "Nikolai." She repeated it silently as she held him, imprinting it into herself. A secret, a promise. Outside, the palace continued its search. Doors opened. Questions were asked. Torches passed within feet of where she hid more than once. Each time, Maya held her breath and trusted the stone walls to keep their silence. They became a strange little family in those hidden spaces. One woman and one child bound together by fear and choice and something dangerously close to hope. Every day increased the risk. Every night deepened the bond. Maya knew how this ended for people like her. She knew what mercy cost in a world ruled by blood and power. But as Nikolai slept against her heart, warm and alive and utterly dependent, she understood something else, too. Whatever came for them next, she would face it as his mother in every way that mattered, even if the palace itself turned against her. The truth did not come to Maya all at once. It seeped in through cracks in the palace walls, through murmured conversations meant for ears that did not matter, through the careless cruelty of those who believed no one was listening. She heard it first while scrubbing blood from the marble floor of the council antechamber. The stain was old, darkened with time, the kind no amount of water ever truly removed. Two nobles stood nearby, their voices low but unconcerned, discussing matters of lineage as casually as the weather. "It would have been simpler if the king had never allowed it," one said. "Human women bring complications." "Affection," the other scoffed. "Weakness. And look where it leads." Maya kept her head bowed, hand steady, heart pounding. "They never survive anyway." The first continued. "Half-bloods. Their existence threatens a balance. The council made that clear generations ago." A pause. Then, softer, almost amused. "If one appears, it is corrected." Corrected. The word followed Maya long after she left the room. She began listening more closely after that. Not openly, never obviously, but with the sharpened attention of someone whose life depended on scraps of truth. In kitchens and hallways, near doorways she had no reason to linger by. Each whisper fit into a shape she didn't want to see, a pattern as cold and precise as the stone beneath her feet. Half-blood vampires were not accidents. They were sins. Old history spoke of them only in fragments, buried beneath euphemism and revision. Children born of human mothers and vampire kings had once existed openly, long before the current court rose to power. Some were said to possess unusual strength. Others were rumored to inspire loyalty across bloodlines. All of them challenged the simple hierarchies the council relied upon, so the laws were written. Quietly, thoroughly, no human was permitted to touch royal vampire blood. No records were kept of such births. No allowances were made. When a half-blood was discovered, the matter was resolved before it could become a problem. Starvation was not considered execution. It was considered inevitability. The name that surfaced most often in these conversations was spoken with reverence or fear. Lord Corvex Blackspire. Maya had seen him only a handful of times, always at a distance. He was tall, severe, his presence sharpening the air around him. He spoke rarely, but when he did, others listened. His beliefs were well known, even when his words were not. Blood was order. Purity was stability. Anything that blurred the line between ruler and subject was rot. He's right. A senior guard muttered one evening, unaware Maya stood just beyond the doorway. The kingdom survives because lines are not crossed. If you allow one exception, everything unravels. Maya's hands clenched at her sides. Exceptions, like the baby sleeping against her chest hours later, warm and impossibly alive. She fed Nikolai in silence that night, her movements automatic, her thoughts spiraling. Every whispered truth settled heavier than the last, pressing down on her until it was hard to breathe. This wasn't a hunt for an abandoned child. It was a cleanup. They were not searching because they feared he might die. They were searching because he hadn't. Maya looked down at him as he fed, his eyes half-lidded, his grip strong now, trusting. He had no idea what he was. No understanding of bloodlines or councils or laws written to erase him. He only knew her heartbeat, her warmth, the way safety felt in her arms. The cruelty of it made her tremble. Even if she hid him perfectly, even if no guard ever found him, no whisper ever reached the wrong ears, this world had already decided his fate. The system was designed so that mercy had nowhere to land. There would always be another corridor, another informant, another judgment waiting to be carried out. This was not about one man's hatred. It was policy. The realization burned through her fear, leaving something harder in its place. Anger. Maya had obeyed her whole life. She had kept her head down, followed rules that never protected her, buried her child without complaint, accepted loss as the price of survival. And still, it had not been enough. Now the same machine that crushed her was reaching for the child in her arms, a child who had committed no crime beyond being born. She felt the weight of it settle fully then, the enormity of what she was defying. Not a guard, not a noble, not even a king. She was defying a system built to ensure that children like Nikolai never lived long enough to be loved. Her jaw tightened, her hold on him steadied. If the palace wanted him dead, then everything she did from this moment forward would be an act of rebellion. Not loud, not glorious, relentless. She would lie, hide, break rules that had never deserved obedience. She would put her body between him and the world if she had to. As Nikolai finished feeding and drifted into sleep, Maya rested her forehead against his and closed her eyes. They had chosen silence for him. She chose defiance. The knock came at the wrong hour. It echoed to the servant's wing like a fracture in bone, measured, deliberate, impossible to mistake for anything else. Maya froze where she stood, one hand braced against the table, the other instinctively tightening around Nikolai. He startled at the sudden tension, his breath hitching before settling again against her chest. No one knocked like that unless they expected an answer. Her first thought was not escape. There was nowhere left to run that she hadn't already used. The palace had tightened around itself these past days. Corridors watched, passages sealed. If they had come for her now, it meant the search was over. Her second thought was of how quickly they would kill her. Maya crossed the room slowly, each step heavy, heart pounding so loudly she was sure it could be heard through the door. She smoothed her hair, straightened her back, and pulled the shawl higher, concealing Nikolai as best she could. If this was the end, she would not beg. The door opened before she reached it. He filled the doorway like a shadow given form. The vampire king was taller than she expected, his presence bending the space around him, as if the air itself leaned closer. His dark cloak bore the sigil of the crown in thread, so fine it caught the light without shining. His face was pale, carved sharp with grief rather than age, his eyes a deep, ancient red that had seen centuries pass without mercy. The guard behind him remained perfectly still. Maya dropped to her knees. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times. How she would confess, how she would shield the baby, how she would meet death without flinching. None of it mattered now. The weight of the king's gaze pressed down on her until breathing felt like disobedience. "You," he said quietly. That was all. Maya bowed her head. "Yes, your majesty." Her hands trembled. Nikolai shifted beneath the cloth, sensing the tension, and made a soft sound before settling again. The king's eyes flicked instantly to the movement. The silence stretched, taut as a blade. "You have something that belongs to me," the king said. Maya's chest tightened. This was it. The words she had known would come, spoken without cruelty, without anger, worse than either. She raised her head just enough to meet his gaze. "If you mean the child," she said, voice steady through sheer force of will, "then I will not deny it." A murmur rippled through the guards. The king lifted one hand, and they fell silent. "Stand," he ordered. Her legs nearly gave out as she obeyed. She held Nikolai tighter, bracing for the moment they would tear him from her arms, for the blade, for the sentence, for the end. Instead, the king stepped closer. Up close, she saw the cracks in him. The exhaustion etched deep around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened, as if holding something back with constant effort. He did not reach for the child. He did not touch him at all. "How long?" he asked. Maya hesitated, then answered honestly. "Days." The king's breath caught. "Who told you to keep him alive?" he demanded, and for the first time, something sharp entered his voice. "No one," she said. "I found him." The king closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the red had darkened, shadowed by something dangerously close to pain. "You should not have survived that choice," he said quietly. "No human ever does." "I know." Another pause. The guard shifted uneasily now, uncertain, their training offering no guidance for this moment. The king reached out then, not toward Maya, but toward the edge of the shawl. He did not pull aside. He only brushed his fingers against the fabric, as if confirming what he already knew. "My son," he said. The words landed like a blow. Maya stared at him, the room tilting. "Your son?" The king nodded once. "Nikolai Veyron." Hearing the name spoken aloud, spoken with ownership, with grief, sent a strange shock through her. The private world she had built around that single word cracked open, revealing a truth far larger and more dangerous than she had imagined. "The council told me he was dead," the king continued. "They told me my human consort died in childbirth, and that the child did not survive the night." His voice faltered, just barely. "Enough. I believe them." Something broke in Maya's chest. Not relief, not fear, but a raw, aching recognition of loss that mirrored her own. She saw then that the king was not here as an executioner. He was here as a father who had buried a lie. "They left him to starve," Maya said softly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "They chose a place where no one would hear him." The king's hands curled into fists. For a long moment, no one spoke. The guard stood rigid, unsure whether they were witnessing mercy or the calm before slaughter. Maya waited for judgment, for orders, for death. Instead, the king lowered himself to one knee. He pulled the shawl back himself, just enough to see the child's face. Nikolai stirred, eyes fluttering open, unfocused but alive. The king's breath shuddered as if he'd been struck. "He looks like her," he whispered. Maya had never seen a king cry before. He did not touch the baby. He only watched, memorizing every breath, every tiny movement, as if afraid this, too, might vanish if he blinked. "You fed him," the king said, not a question. "Yes." A nod. No condemnation. No praise. "You broke every law that exists to do so." "Yes." Another nod. "Those laws were written to protect power," he said quietly. "Not life." Maya's knees weakened. Relief surged so suddenly it left her dizzy. But it did not last. The king rose, his expression hardening once more. "This changes nothing about the danger," he said. "The council does not yet know I am aware. If they did, they would act before I could stop them. What will happen to him?" Maya asked, fear rushing back. "That," the king replied, eyes locking onto hers, "depends on how carefully we move." He turned to the guards. "No one speaks of this," he commanded. "Not a word. Anyone who does answers to me." They bowed instantly. The king looked back at Maya, his gaze heavy with something like gratitude and warning. "You are alive because you were necessary," he said. "You remain alive because my son trusts you." Maya understood the unspoken truth. She was spared, but she was not safe. As the king turned to leave, the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on her harder than any fear she had known before. The world had shifted beneath her feet, revealing a deeper game, one played with crowns and blood and children who should never have been sacrificed. Maya looked down at Nikolai, sleeping peacefully, unaware of how close death had come, unaware of how many still wish him gone. Whatever this had become, whatever storms were coming, one thing was clear now. Saving him had only been the beginning. The days that followed settled into a strange, borrowed calm. Nothing was announced. Nothing was explained. The palace continued its routines as if nothing had happened at all, and yet everything had changed. Guards still patrolled. Servants still worked. Counselors still met behind closed doors. But now there were eyes on Maya that had not been there before. Quiet, deliberate eyes that watched without accusation. Protection, disguised as indifference. The king did not come again, but his presence lingered in the way doors opened when she approached, in the way certain corridors were suddenly left unguarded at specific hours. Orders were being given without her name attached to them. Paths were being cleared just long enough for her to pass. She understood the message clearly enough. She was to remain unseen but unharmed. Maya was moved from room to room with quiet efficiency, always at night, always through routes she did not know well enough to map. The places she was given were safer than before, warmer, closer to occupied wings, guarded by silence rather than neglect. Someone had thought carefully about that. Someone who understood what hunger and cold could do to a child. Nikolai stayed with her always. No nurse was assigned. No cradle delivered. No announcement made of his survival. Officially, the heir did not exist. Unofficially, Maya became his world. She learned quickly how to keep him quiet when voices drew near, how to read the subtle signs of hunger before he cried, how to hold him so the faint glow of torchlight would not catch the unnatural red of his eyes. She was taught, too, by others who never spoke directly, by a guard who lingered just long enough to adjust a lock, by a servant who left fresh linens without explanation, by the way certain times of day were suddenly safer than others. Trust formed in fragments. The baby thrived. His strength returned with startling speed now. He kicked when he was fed, small feet pressing against her stomach. He watched her face intently, his gaze no longer unfocused but curious, studying her as if committing her to memory. Sometimes he smiled, not fully, not yet, but enough to steal the air from her lungs. Each sign of health filled her with joy she did not dare share, because beneath the fragile peace, tension coiled like a living thing. Maya felt in the palace's rhythm, in the sharpness of conversations that stopped when she entered a room. She heard it in whispers that slipped through doors not meant to be overheard. The council was restless. The search had ended too abruptly, too quietly. Lord Corvex's Black Spire had not spoken publicly since the king's return. That silence frightened her more than outrage would have. She saw him once, from across the great hall, his posture immaculate, his expression unreadable as he listened to a report delivered in hushed tones. His gaze flicked briefly in her direction, just once, just long enough, and something cold settled in her chest. He knew, not everything, not yet, but enough. The king, she realized, was buying time. Time to prepare. Time to decide how much truth could be revealed without igniting open war within his own court. Time that Nikolai needed to grow stronger. Time that Maya used to bind herself more tightly to the child she guarded. She no longer thought of herself as merely keeping him alive. She was raising him. That truth came to her one evening as she rocked him through a restless spell, murmuring nonsense sounds until his breathing slowed. Her body moved with practiced ease now, confidence replacing the fear that had once ruled every gesture. This was not borrowed instinct. It was earned. "You trust me," she whispered, brushing her lips against his brow. Nikolai sighed, his fingers curling into the fabric of her sleeve, anchoring himself to her as if there were no safer place in the world. The realization made her chest ache. She knew how temporary this peace was, knew that forces far larger than her love were shifting, aligning, waiting. The palace was holding its breath, and when it exhaled, the sound would be violent. For now, though, there were quiet nights, warm rooms, the soft weight of a child asleep against her heart. Hope lived there, not boldly, not foolishly, but carefully, like a flame shielded by trembling hands. Maya guarded it as fiercely as she guarded Nikolai, because she could feel it deep in her bones. This fragile stability was not the ending. It was the calm before something terrible tried to take him from her. It began without warning. No bells rang. No horns sounded. The palace did not erupt into chaos the way stories claimed it did when power shifted hands. Instead, everything went quiet, too quiet, like a hell breath stretched past its limit. Maya felt it before she understood it. Nikolai stirred sharply in her arms, waking from sleep with a frightened gasp. His small hands clenched, his eyes snapping open, suddenly alert in a way they never were unless something was wrong. Maya's heart lurched. She turned slowly, listening. Footsteps, many of them, but not hurried, purposeful, spread out. They weren't searching. They were moving into position. Maya backed toward the far wall instinctively, pulling the child close beneath her cloak. Her mind raced, fitting fragments together too quickly to ignore. The king had not returned since morning. The corridor she relied on had been quiet for hours. Too empty. This wasn't disorder. It was coordinated. The door exploded inward, would splintered, slamming against the stone wall as armored figures surged into the room. Torches flared, harsh and blinding, filling the space with heat and smoke. Maya turned and ran before any command could be given, her body reacting faster than thought. She took the narrow passage behind the tapestry, boots pounding behind her almost immediately. A shout rang out. Orders barked, sharp and urgent. Don't let her reach the lower levels. They knew the routes. Fear cut through her like ice. Maya ran harder. Nikolai pressed tight against her chest as she took the stairs two at a time, breath burning in her lungs. The baby cried now, loud, panicked, unmistakably alive. "Quiet, please," she begged, voice breaking, though she knew it was impossible. A hand grabbed her cloak from behind. Maya spun and struck blindly with her elbow, pain flaring as she connected with armor. She stumbled, barely catching herself before falling, twisting her body so Nikolai's had stayed protected as she hit the wall hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. A blade flashed. She screamed, not from fear for herself, but at the thought of it reaching him. She kicked out, catching the attacker in the knee. He went down with a grunt, and she ran again, blood roaring in her ears. Stone toward her palms as she slid around a corner. Ducking through a half-collapsed doorway, she prayed they wouldn't think to check. She hid there, pressed against the damp wall, heart hammering so violently she feared it would give her away. Nikolai sobbed, his cries sharp with terror. Maya covered his mouth gently with her hand, rocking him despite her own shaking. "It's all right," she whispered, though nothing was. "I've got you. I've got you." Boots thundered past. Voices argued, frustrated, furious. She went this way. No. Check the upper wing. Maya waited until her legs threatened to give out, then moved again, slipping deeper into forgotten spaces of the palace. She knew now what this was. Not an arrest, not a retrieval, an execution. They had chosen a moment when the king was gone, when orders could be framed as confusion, when a dead servant and a missing half-blood could be explained away as tragedy. She burst into a storage chamber and slammed the door, dragging a heavy crate in front of it just as something struck from the other side. The impact shook the hinges. Nikolai wailed, the sound raw and desperate. Maya dropped to the floor, shielding him with her body as was splintered. A blade punched through the door, missing her by inches. "Give us the child," a voice snarled. "You don't have to die for this." Maya laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "Yes," she gasped. "I do." The door gave way. She scrambled back, grabbing the fallen torch and swinging it wildly. Flame caught on fabric. Someone shouted. Smoke filled the room. Maya ran again, blindly now, coughing, eyes burning, her strength fraying with every step. She tripped in the corridor, hitting the stone hard. Pain exploded through her side. She curled around Nikolai instinctively, bracing for the blow that would finish it. It didn't come. For one suspended moment. There was only the sound of her ragged breathing and the baby's sobs against her chest. Then steel rang against steel. A roar echoed through the passage. Furious, commanding, unmistakable. The attackers faltered, some turning, some retreating as the space filled with armed guards bearing the royal sigil. The vampire king stepped into view like a storm given shape. "Enough!" His voice cracked the air. The remaining conspirators dropped to their knees, or tried to run, and were cut down where they stood. Maya didn't see most of it. She was already on the floor, shaking uncontrollably, clutching Nikolai so tightly she feared she might hurt him. Blood soaked her sleeve. Hers, she thought dimly, though she couldn't feel the wound yet. The king was suddenly there, crouching beside her. "Look at me," he said urgently. She lifted her eyes. "You did not fail," he said. "You kept him alive." Maya let out a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or both, her strength finally gone. She bowed over Nikolai, pressing her face to his hair, as relief crashed through her in a wave so powerful it hurt. Around them, the palace burned with the consequences of its betrayal. But in her arms, the child lived. And she had proven, under fire, under blades, under the weight of a kingdom, that there was nothing she would not do to keep him that way. The palace did not recover quietly. By dawn, the illusion of order had shattered completely. Guards stood at every archway, not in ceremonial formation, but in battle lines. The scent of smoke still clung to corridors, mingling with iron and fear. Servants whispered behind lowered eyes. Nobles locked themselves behind doors that had never before needed locks. The vampire king had returned, not as a grieving father, but as a ruler who had set a trap and watched his enemies walk willingly into it. Maya learned the truth later in fragments, while Nikolai slept heavily against her chest under the care of healers who dared not ask questions. The attack had not been a surprise to the king. It had been a confirmation. He had left the palace, knowing exactly what would happen in his absence. Lord Corvex Blackspire had always believed himself indispensable. He had built his power carefully, through ideology, through fear, through the quiet certainty that the council would choose stability over conscience every time. When the king left, Corvex moved as predicted, ordering a swift, deniable strike meant to erase the problem before it could be acknowledged. What he had not anticipated was how thoroughly the king had prepared. The conspirators were allowed to act. Orders were recorded. Witnesses were planted. Guards loyal to Corvex were followed, their movements documented, their commands traced. Every step tightened the noose they did not see forming nearing. When the king returned mid-attack, it was not to stop chaos. It was to end it. The council chamber filled quickly, summoned under the pretense of emergency. Torches blazed high against the stone, illuminating faces drawn tight with unease. Lord Corvex stood at the center as he always had, spine straight, expression composed, already preparing his defense. The king did not sit. He stood before them, cloak stained dark at the hem, eyes burning with fury that stripped the room of pretense. With a single gesture, guards dragged forward the first of the captured conspirators, bloodied, terrified, very much alive. "Speak," the king commanded. And they did. Names spilled. Orders were recited. Times, routes, sealed permissions, all laid bare. The council's murmurs rose, fractured, then fell into stunned silence as the scope of the betrayal became undeniable. Corvex did not deny it. He lifted his chin, voice calm even as the weight of the room turned against him. "I did what was necessary," he said, "for the kingdom, for purity, For the future you are too weak to protect. The king descended the steps slowly. You order my child to be starved, he said, each word precise. You violated my authority, my bloodline, and the laws you claim to uphold. Corvex smiled thinly. I upheld them. The king struck him, not with rage, but with judgment. Steel rang out as Corvex was disarmed, driven to his knees by guards who no longer hesitated. The council watched, frozen, as centuries of assumed invincibility collapsed in a single, brutal moment. There will be no quiet corrections, the king said to the room. No hidden graves, no lies told in my name. He turned his gaze outward, sweeping over every noble present. You build a system that feeds on silence. Today it answers for itself. By nightfall, arrests echoed through the palace. Seats on the council stood empty. Edicts were rewritten and sealed in blood rather than ink. Those who had hidden behind tradition were dragged into the light and forced to face consequence for the first time in generations. Maya did not witness Corvex's execution. She did not need to. She felt the shift instead, the way the palace exhaled after years of holding rot within its walls. The way fear changed direction, no longer pressing down on the powerless alone. When the king finally came to her again, it was without guards. It's finished, he said quietly. Maya looked down at Nikolai, warm and alive, and understood the truth beneath the words. Not that the danger was gone, but that it had been named, dragged into the open and broken. Power had collapsed under the weight of its own cruelty. And for the first time since she had found a silent baby on a stone floor, the world felt altered in a way that could not be undone. They gathered at dusk, not in secret corridors or sealed chambers, but in the great hall where banners hung openly and light poured through high windows carved with the history of the kingdom. Nobles filled the galleries. Guards lined the walls. Servants stood where they were allowed, watching with careful, disbelieving eyes. Maya stood at the edge of it all. Nikolai held close, his small weight familiar against her chest. When the vampire king stepped forward, the hall fell silent. There's been a lie at the heart of this court, he said, his voice carrying without effort. A lie protected by fear, tradition, and a belief that power justifies cruelty. Murmurs rippled, uneasy. My son lives, the king continued, and no law, no counsel, no false devotion to purity will erase him again. He turned, extending his hand. Maya hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. The world seemed to narrow to the space between her and the throne, to the steady warmth of the child she had saved at the cost of everything. She felt every gaze on her, curious, shocked, reassessing. The king gently drew back the cloth. Nikolai blinked, startled by the light, then made a soft sound that echoed impossibly loud in the vast hall. Red eyes, bright and unmistakable now, looked out at a kingdom that had once condemned him unseen. This is Prince Nikolai Veron, the king declared, heir to my blood and my crown. The silence shattered. Some bowed immediately. Others hesitated, caught between old beliefs and undeniable truth. But the moment had passed. The lie was dead, and everyone knew it. Maya felt something inside her finally loosen, an ache she had carried since the silent chamber, since the moment she chose defiance without knowing where it would lead. She was no longer hiding, no longer alone. Later, when the hall emptied and the palace settled into a quieter, watchful peace, the king found her in a sunlit room overlooking the gardens. You will remain with him, he said simply, as his guardian, as his family. Maya nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. That night, she sat by a window with Nikolai wrapped in her arms, the palace calm around them in a way she had never known. The stars were faint beyond the glass, but steady. She brushed a finger along his cheek. He stirred, then smiled, small, unguarded, real. I chose you, she whispered, and you chose me back. There was no thunder in that moment, no crown placed, no vow spoken aloud. Just a woman who had refused to let a child die, and a child who lived because of it. Maya rested her forehead against his, breathing him in. Once, she had believed motherhood ended in loss. Now she knew better. It was defined by choice. And she would choose him, again and again, as long as the world allowed her to do so.